Hey guys, what is up? SuperKmanrocks here, and I am here for my LEC Playoffs Round 1 overview and analysis. This has been a little bit of like a week in the making. Obviously, the schedule was very weird here in the LEC, and so the first series I'm going to talk about happened last weekend. We've already touched on it a bit, and then the second series obviously just happened a couple hours ago as of when I'm recording this video, but a lot of really interesting things to get into. We are down to the top 4 teams in the spring split here in the LEC. At least 2 of these teams are going to be heading to MSI, G2 being one of them, of course, for winning the winter split, and then, you know, depending on what happens, you know, whoever ends up winning the split here will kind of decide how that ends up going. Obviously, there are a lot of different circumstances, which we will get into throughout the video, but I hope you guys are excited. If you are, let me know down in the comment section below. One quick aside, hopefully some of those audio glitches that maybe you guys have gotten used to if you watch a lot of my videos should be done and dusted. I've actually got a new computer now, and so hopefully a lot of those random freezing, you know, situations where you're just getting these weird glitches and it kind of jumps to a different part, that should be done. There really shouldn't be a lot of those anymore. I really appreciate you guys sticking with me through a lot of those, but without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into it. We've got 2 series to cover. Of course, if you're new here, what we're going to do is go game by game in each of the series, talking about what went right and what went wrong for each individual team, trying to give you a pretty comprehensive breakdown of how everything happened with these teams. So let's go ahead and kick it off with our upper bracket finals. This is guaranteed to be 2 of the top 3 teams here in the spring split. It's the 2 teams that won their groups in the group stage that we just kind of covered. Again, if you want to know how those group stages went, you can check out my video up in the iCard right now, but we're going to go ahead and talk about that matchup that happened last weekend. It's a matchup between the number 1 seeded BDS and the number 4 seeded Team Vitality. Really intriguing matchup. Not a lot of people saw this happening at the beginning of spring. Vitality, definitely a team people saw a lot of upside in, especially with the addition of Upset into their bottom lane to kind of round out what was a rather full roster last split, and a lot of the things that people really wanted to see from them have, you know, kind of come to fruition. They've really kind of executed on a lot of the potential I think a lot of people had. Photon was the MVP in winter for me, and Bo was obviously fantastic when he gets to play his style. He had maybe the most dominant jungle series I've ever watched in pro in the finals of group stage against Astralis. Unbelievable. Perks is always incredibly consistent. And then Upson and Kaiser have been a huge positive for this team, even if they're at the focal point all the time. Vitality has been good, but BDS is a little bit of the surprise. They shouldn't be. They were the number 1 seed in the regular season in the LEC, and they've really not stopped ever since then. They didn't drop a single game in the group stage. I don't think either of these teams dropped a single game in the group stage, both of them going 4-0, but BDS doing so in amazing fashion. Really being a team that I think has grown so much. The bot lane has become entirely elite. Crowny and Labrov have hit that point where you can realistically call them one of the top 2 or 3 at worst bot lanes in the LEC. Adam might have very well been the MVP of the split in the regular season. He was phenomenal up in the top lane, creating advantages, being a mismatch for a lot of these teams that don't have a lot of top lane pressure, and Sheo and Nuke have developed a lot. Sheo, in particular, I've been really impressed with out of the jungle, but really intriguing matchup here. I think Adam versus Photon is certainly the matchup to watch, but Crowny and Labrov versus Upset and Kaiser could certainly be something interesting as well. Of course, Labrov being replaced on this Vitality team this year by Kaiser, so definitely a little bit of a storyline there, but really excited to jump into it. I don't want to waste too much of you guys' time. We're going to be going game by game, so let's kick it off with game number 1, and the winner of game number 1 was BDS. They are able to take the first game of the series here. They're able to go up 1-0, which obviously, big boon, big advantage. You want to be able to generate that momentum, and obviously, you know, creating a situation where you've only got to win 2 of the next 4 instead of 3 of the next 4 is certainly a good situation to be in when you're playing good teams like you are in the playoffs. All of the teams that we're going to talk about today are very good at League of Legends, but BDS doing a really good job being able to establish that early, maybe to the surprise of a lot of people. This game was dominant, and it looks really dominant on paper. I will say it was a little bit closer than maybe the 11-0 kill score would say it was, but it still was a BDS controlled game, and they still did a very good job of being able to kind of exert their pressure in this one. What ended up happening? Well, we can go over that. First blood coming out from BDS, and this is all Labrov. He ends up moving up through the mid lane, right past the vision, and basically the only place that he can walk without being spotted. Just a really smart play from a really smart player who has impressed me so much over the course of this year. He's able to kind of pair up with Sheo. They get a CC chain down on Perks, and they're able to kill him for first blood, and that really hurts his game. His Ahri was not very good. We'll get into that a little bit later, but then we kind of move on. BDS continues to control the early game, and it's just kind of play after play after play. Vitality does want to answer with something top lane, so they go for this play on Adam, but unfortunately, he just kind of outplays it. He's a little bit too tanky at this point in the game, and he ends up trading 1 for 0. Like, he ends up getting a kill under tower because they go too deep, and, you know, it's really, really good stuff coming out from BDS. It's a 2-0 lead with basically a 3k gold lead from moment 1. Like, we're sitting here at about 5 or 6 minutes into the game, and it feels like BDS has full control. They get another kill bot. Crownie and Lebrov again doing a really good job being able to exert their 2v2 dominance, but really, when you look at the mid game, I wanted a little bit more, and this is unfortunate to say about a team that I do think had a really good game, but they were just giving over a few too many things, giving over towers, trading objectives, and it's just like, all right, well, this is fine, but I really don't think you have to trade here. Like, I really think you have enough pressure on the map to be able to try and hold off and try to create plays in multiple places on the map. It didn't feel like they had the same kind of confidence in themselves and what they wanted to do, but that's okay. Vitality does bring the gold lead back into about only like 1k by the time we hit 20 minutes, by the time we hit this late game, but really the late game is where it starts to become a little bit of a problem for Vitality. They're just not able to hang on in this game. BDS is able to win every fight. Crownie, in particular, is just doing so much damage on this Aphelios by the end of the game that there's really not a lot that Vitality can actually do. The Akshan, you know, despite being up basically like 80 CS the entire game, is never relevant in any team fight, and Perks can't hit a charm to save his life, and so none of these fights end up going their way. You can see that in the fact that they didn't get a single kill this entire game, but good for BDS. I think you played it out a little bit slower than maybe I would have, but at the end of the day, as long as you're able to close it out, even if the base race at the end was a little bit interesting, you were able to close it out, and that is a good thing. So for BDS, my player of the game is going to have to go to Lebrov. The dude has been phenomenal. I've hyped him up so much over the course of this split so far, and I think all of it has been rightfully so. I don't think he's gotten nearly the same kind of credit that he's deserved in this support position. He has emerged and solidified himself as a top 2, top 3, maybe at worst, support in the entire region. He's right up there with basically anybody else that you want to put in that role, whether it's Mickey, whether it's Hillisang, whether it's someone like Jonghoon, who I know a lot of people were really high on after this, but Kaiser on the other side of this. There were a lot of good supports, but Lebrov is right up there with any of them with how he is playing right now. He can do it on a lot of different styles, but allowing him to be active on the map, allowing him to pair up with the rest of his team, and even just in the 2v2, in the lane, he's just incredibly dominant, incredibly difficult to play into. He has been awesome, and he's going to get my player of the game here. Crownie was also great, obviously being able to do as much as he did in the late game. No one was able to stop this Aphelios. I remember the one time that they were trying to close out the game before they actually did. He goes into the top lane, everybody's kind of pushing in the top lane. He just like raw fires out ultimate, and he's able to chunk everybody on the side of Vitality out into like below half health just with one button, and it's like, man, this Aphelios is just ridiculously strong at this point. He did a good job exerting his pressure, and him and Lebrov were definitely the main focal points, but credit to Adam for not, you know, tilting with the matchup that he was given. He was counterpicked incredibly hard in the top lane. That's what you get when you blind Darius. You end up getting Akshan pulled on you and being down like 80, 90 CS at points in this game, but he survived. He was able to kind of outlast it, and quite frankly, the Akshan was never all that useful in the late game, and the Darius was able to do some things. He was able to outplay the gank, and then obviously was kind of useful in the late game. Sheo and Nuke were good. Again, just exerting pressure in the early game. Maokai, Ori, they don't have to carry here. They don't need to be the big focal points of a lot of the pressure. You want to be able to give that to your Aphelios, and I think they did. So BDS kind of understanding their win condition. I do think they traded a little bit too much in the mid game, and, you know, kind of gave some gold over to Vitality that they probably didn't need to give over, but at the end of the day, as long as you're able to pull it back, and as long as you're able to dominate every single fight like they were in this game, it was going to be pretty smooth sailing. As for Vitality on the other side, just not a very good showing in game number 1 here. Getting completely shut out in terms of kills is never going to be a good thing, but I don't really think they ever showed that aggressiveness that we all loved out of Vitality in the regular season. We loved that they were willing to try and make these plays. It felt like this game they were playing a little bit scared, and that's never going to be something that I feel good about when coming to this Vitality team. My dud of the game is going to go to Perks in the mid lane. The Ahri's usually good. It was not good in this one. He just missed a lot of charms. He was dealing no damage. He wasn't even really peeling for the rest of his team. Usually with the Ahri, you can either kind of split it into, oh, this is she's assassinating the back lane, there's not much we can do. Or you're at the point where it's like, well, she's got Everfrost and she's got cooldown boots. She's just perma-CCing the enemy team. He wasn't really doing either this game, and I think a lot of the lost pressure that he had in the early game was a big problem for why Vitality couldn't have a lot of pressure in the jungle. And Bo didn't play great. Photon even being up ADCS, I would say didn't play great. I know it's it's kind of hard to say that because he was dominating the lane so hard, but that's a matchup where you absolutely should. Like, there's nothing Darius can do into someone like Akshan, and so for him to dominate it, like, yes, it's good, but he needed to transition some of that lead somewhere else, and then Upset and Kaiser. Upset going 0-0-0 the whole game just kind of encapsulates what ended up happening. Crowny and Lebrov were just so much more useful as a duo here, and so Vitality definitely got to get back on the board. You don't want to drop down 2-0 against a team like BDS. For as little hype as they got going into the year, they have clearly proven that they deserve to be here, and you don't want to go down 2-0 and have to win 3 games in a row against Adam and Crowny and Lebrov and Sheo and Nuke, who you just don't know what they're going to throw at you, and you can't particularly counter what they're trying to do, and so this is a must-win game 2, in my opinion, for Vitality, especially with how game 1 went. For BDS, you just got to keep up the momentum. This was a really good start. You just got to be able to translate it into something a little bit more. But are they going to be able to do that? Or is Vitality going to strike back? Well, the winner of game number 2 was BDS. They are able to take game number 2. They're able to go up into the series 2-0, which is massive, obviously, and they really are able to completely take control of Team Vitality, which is not something I expected to happen in this series. For as good as BDS has been, Vitality looked like the team coming out of groups that really was just going to kind of waltz into the finals. BDS, not really the team with the star power that I think a lot of people thought were going to be able to compete with Photon and Upset, and even if you don't believe in Bo and Perks and their consistency, like, there's a lot of talent on Vitality outside of that as well, but we were all wrong. Like, there's really nothing else to say. BDS has grown into everything that we could have hoped they could have grown into. They are one of the best teams in the West, period, end of story, and they are proving it over and over again. Another really solid win for them here. This one, definitely more competitive, in my opinion, than game number 1, which just felt like a slow kind of BDS win that they ended up slogging towards. Not to say they played bad by any means, or that they played it wrong, just that, like, Vitality didn't put up much resistance, right? The game just kind of went and then it slowly ended. This one was definitely a little bit more back and forth, a little bit more happening in the mid game. So let's go ahead and talk about it. Vitality actually has a pretty solid early game in this one. They are able to get first blood in the bot lane. Upset is able to pick up the 2v2 kill onto Lebrov. The Aphelios and Tom just playing a little bit too aggro, and the Xayah definitely making them pay for it. And then a really nice first dragon fight where, yes, BDS is able to grab the dragon. They're able to grab a kill at the beginning here, but nice roam down from Bo and Perks. A really good team up there to be able to create some pressure on the top side, kind of, pincer BDS, if you will, and be able to pick up 2 more kills on the back of that. And so Vitality honestly looking okay through the first couple of minutes of this game. BDS certainly not out of it by any means. It's more of a neutral early game, which I think is a relatively good early game for Vitality. And then the Herald fight happens, and that's where things really start to fall apart for Vitality. Just a huge win for BDS. At the time, I think it's only a 1-0, maybe it's a 2-0, but it ends up giving so much pressure over to BDS, and they use the Herald so well that the Gold League does balloon to like 1.5k, basically off of that play by itself, which is never a good thing. Also, compounding that, not 2 minutes later, Adam on Sion ends up getting a solo kill onto Photon in the top lane. Really shouldn't be happening, just not excusable by the Kennen in the top lane. Not a good game from Photon. We'll kind of get to that in a little bit. I do think he made up for it a bit in some of the team fights, but had a really bad laning phase in a matchup that, quite frankly, he should just win. And really good job from Adam on the Sion. It's been a pick that he's been very quietly very good at this year, and so good stuff coming out from BDS to be able to kind of not only equalize the game, but kind of take the lead back and take control again. And that just kind of transitions us into our mid game, where the best way I can say it is that Vitality is just way too aggro. They go ahead and try to make some plays. I know I was a little bit critical of them not being aggro enough in game number 1. They clearly got the same kind of advice from their coaches because they took it way too literally. They were looking to fight in the mid game here over and over and over again, and almost every single time they were taking fights that were just not good. Most of it was Bo, but sometimes it's Perks going in, or sometimes it's Kaiser hex flashing over a wall into 3 people for no reason, right? There's just so many plays where you look at it and you're like, what are you thinking? Like, I don't understand what the idea behind it is. And credit to BDS, you got to be able to capitalize on those, but that's really what ballooned the game out of control for BDS. They're able to kind of turn, kind of disengage a lot of these really bad engages from Vitality, counter-engage them, and be able to just kind of obliterate them. Mostly it's Nuke on this Cassio, but Crowny on the Aphelios also a big problem. And then, by the end game, they now have the gold, and so they can go for a lot of these flank plays. Sheo with some great initiations, and then some really good follow-ups with the rest of the team, and BDS is able to take it. They're able to close out pretty cleanly, and it's a 2-0 lead. That's exactly what you wanted to see for BDS. My player of the game is going to go to Nuke in the mid lane on this Cassio. What a great game from Nuke. Even I don't want to say I've been calling him the weak link of this team, because I'm certainly not saying that he's been carried. He's held up his own end of the bargain. I just don't think he's been given a lot of opportunities to be like the hero for BDS in the same way that Adam or Crownie has been kind of the hero over the course of this split. But this game was really, really good for him. Just great positioning on the Casio. That champion can do a ridiculous amount of damage in the late game if you are untargeted in the backline, if you're just able to get out all your shit. And I think he did a really good job knowing where he needed to be, being able to control the pacing of the fight, and then just quite frankly deleting everybody else on the enemy team. Good stuff from Nuke. Crownie and Labrov were again pretty good. Labrov, not as perfect in the early game. Like I said, that early first blood was just kind of his fault. He was just overextended. But outside of that, really no flaws. He had a phenomenal play in the middle of this game where Vitality goes for a full engage right around mid lane, and he perfectly times his eat so that he saves his AD carry. He ends up going down for it, but Crownie gets this massive ult off and just completely destroys Vitality. It's just a perfect Tahm Kench play. There really is nothing else to say. Labrov is awesome, and then, like I said, Crownie was great. Sheo with some good engages. Adam got a solo kill in the top lane. Everybody doing their job. BDS is a complete team. They're not, led by 1 or 2 or 3 players. This is a group of 5 players that are all playing at a really high level right now, and that's what makes them so dangerous. And then Vitality on the other side, a lot of the fears that Vitality fans had are coming out here. This is a team that has historically not done well in the playoffs and not done well in high-pressure games, and it continues to be a problem here. And the biggest thing that I'm worried about is my dud of the game again for game number 2 is Perks, and this has kind of been a trend with Perks over the past, I'd say, year plus, where he just hasn't been very good in games that have mattered a lot. Ever since he came over to Vitality, it's not really been a strong suit of his. You remember last year, not that Spring was very good, but he wasn't very good in the games that mattered to try and get into playoffs into Spring. And then this was looking like a team that very well could have gone to Worlds in terms of their power level by the time this team was heading into the final weeks of the season in summer, and they threw it all away, going 0-4 in that final week of the regular season to miss playoffs. It was just a disaster ending. They weren't good in winter. They continue to look suspect in the best of 5s here in Spring. It's a worrying trend for Perks and for this team in general. Bo was bad this game. Photon was not good in lane, and yes, he was able to get some cleanup kills in a lot of these team fights, but the Kennen ults really weren't all that good. Upset and Kaiser have been fine. Upset's still yet to die in this series, after having lost twice, and some people are going to look at that and say that he's hard stuck, but it's not like he's doing damage. It's not like he's stepping up and trying to make plays. I always talk about this. I would much rather an AD carry die trying to kill 2 or 3 people than live doing no damage on the backline. Like, that's just kind of not the point of the role. Like, you have to do damage in order to be relevant, and it just feels like Upset's been completely irrelevant over the course of the series outside of that first blood, so a lot of things need to get turned around for Vitality. They're not playing well right now, and they need to start kicking it into gear, or else this is going to be a really short series for BDS. Obviously, series point now, neither of these teams are eliminated by losing, but the winner does secure their place top 2 in the region and in the finals, which is massive for either organization that has desperately tried to get there. And so, is BDS going to be able to close it out in a clean sweep, or is Vitality going to be able to fight back and at least turn this into a little bit of a series? Well, the winner of game number 3 was BDS. They are able to take game number 3. They're able to close out the series, and they're able to clean sweep Vitality. I don't think a lot of people saw this one coming. As good as I think a lot of people saw BDS being, and as real as I think a lot of people took them, especially towards the back half of group stage with how they were able to play in what was the more stacked group, I still don't think a lot of people saw them coming out here and actually just destroying Vitality, because that's what they did here. They didn't drop a single game, and BDS has yet to drop a single game in the, post-regular season up until this point. 2-0, 4-0, I guess you could say, in group stage, 2-0 in both of the series that they played, and then a 3-0 here in the first round of the playoffs. Incredibly great stuff. They are undefeated in the postseason, I guess you could say, going into the finals, and that's about as good as you could ask for. But what ended up happening this game? Well, this was the closest game of the series by far. As much as I'm talking BDS up, they actually weren't in control of a lot of this game. Vitality did a much better job of being able to establish themselves, and I'll kind of get to why in a little bit, but the early game is just very back and forth. A lot of attention in the mid lane from both of these teams. Vitality starts it off. Really nice gank onto Sheo. Not a gank, but like Sheo getting caught out in the upper side of the map and being able to kind of be taken down there. Photon doing a good job roaming down to kind of secure that. And then, BDS try to fire back. A 2v2 on the bot side of mid lane. That goes the way of BDS. And then a gank in the mid lane from Vitality. That goes the way of Vitality. It's just mid lane pressure, back and forth from both of these teams. And Vitality doing a pretty good job being able to come out on top in a lot of those situations. You know, you've got some back and forth plays, but Vitality for the most part are able to generate a small gold lead that really kind of balloons around first Dragon. Now, Dragon is super delayed this game. I don't even think we get first Dragon until like 11 minutes into the game, which is absolutely absurd considering, you know, how early these Dragons are going in a lot of the other regions. But Vitality ends up winning that Dragon. They end up winning the fight that correlates with that. And then by the time we hit that 15-minute mark, we're actually looking at like a 4K gold lead for Vitality. They should have full control of this map. They're able to generate a lot from towers. They're able to generate a lot from mid lane. Perkz having a really good early game in this one, and quite frankly, it looks like their game to lose, but that's where we start to get into the mid to late game here, where BDS, quite frankly, just has significantly better macro. They're always grouped up. They're always at a numbers advantage. Vitality tries to take advantage of too many things on the map. They're not at the point in the game where they can just win everywhere, and so they needed to be a little bit more methodical with how they played out the back half of the game, and methodical is not a word I would use to describe what Bo was doing, and clearly it was just problem after problem for Vitality. Even though they were able to consistently keep that gold lead in a relatively decent spot for themselves, they didn't have control over the map. BDS was doing a good job getting wards down and actually being first to a lot of the objectives, and it made Vitality's lead kind of useless through a lot of the mid game here. So good job from BDS. It was a little bit back and forth towards the back half of the game. There was a really big second Herald fight for BDS. That's when the game really started to move into their favor. It was a great hook from Lebrov on the Thresh. He played the Thresh at a super high level, and then Crowny does a great job cleaning up, but then, you know, they kind of throw away that lead a little bit in a bot lane fight where Perkz plays out of his mind, and Upset does a great job cleaning it up. Unfortunately, Vitality's just not able to hold on. They overextend a little bit. Bo gets caught, and then Perkz is also way behind enemy lines. He ends up going down basically like 30 seconds before Baron spawns with 40-second death timers. So he's not going to be there for the Baron fight. BDS get full control of that. Vitality try their best to go in and keep the game alive, but a massive shockwave from Nuke and then just the cleanup from Crowny make the fight super easy for BDS, and they're able to close out the game, basically just off some mispositioning mistakes from Vitality. But you gotta give credit where credit is due. BDS played great in this series, and they definitely were the better team. You don't win 3-0 by accident. That's just not how that goes. My player of the game is gonna go to Crowny, but I think more so than some of the other games, this was a team effort. In Game 1, it was definitely Lebrov. In Game 2, it was definitely Nuke that were kind of carrying it. Crowny was great in every single game, and he's going to get my player of the game here in Game 3, but they wouldn't have been able to do this without Sheo being able to control the map. They wouldn't have been able to do this without Lebrov landing some incredibly big hooks. Yes, he missed some as well, but, you know, landing some really, really big ones, and they certainly wouldn't have been able to do it without Crowny's damage on this Jinx. There were just a lot of circumstances where BDS needed everybody on the team to step up, and quite frankly, all of them did, and that's what's the most impressive. I think for this team, there was a lot of question marks about whether or not this level of talent could maintain themselves for BDS, because a lot of these players really haven't played at this level, you know, or played as good as they are at this level in the past, but clearly, you know, they have unlocked a new form of themselves. Playing together as a unit has clearly made them one of the best teams in Europe, and I think they proved that again here. Crowny was awesome, Nuke was awesome, Sheo was awesome, Lebrov was awesome, Adam had some good moments as well, but, you know, wasn't necessarily the focal point, which is always going to be a good thing for BDS. When they can win without the person who I think was probably the MVP of the regular season, that's just a ridiculously impressive performance from BDS. They continue to look like one of, if not the best team in Europe right now, and honestly, I really only have good things to say about them. As for Vitality on the other side, their problems have exposed themselves. They're not eliminated by losing this series. They are still alive in the playoffs. They guaranteed themselves top 3 by winning their group, but a lot of the worries that people had with Vitality definitely came true in this series. My dud of the game is going to go to Bo. That's just not even a question. The dude was miserable on the Sejuani, and this is the coin flip of Bo. You saw that Astralis series, you know, going into it, that was the most recent that we saw him as a player in Pro, and he obliterated that series. I mean, 1-1-3 was just not on the map in those games, but this is the problem, is that aggressive style can kind of get him into trouble as well. He was just taking fights, especially in games 2 and 3, that just were not very good for the team, and he ended up costing them a lot of gold. If you get the good version of Bo, where, you know, a lot of the fights that he's taking are able to be followed up by the rest of the team, and they're able to capitalize on the advantages that he creates, he's one of the best junglers in the West, if not the single best jungler in the West. But man, when he is off, he is like really, really off, and he was off today, which just meant that Vitality really had no shot. Perkz didn't have a very good series. He was good on the Sylas, but he made a super crucial error that ended up costing them the game towards the back half here, and he was bad in the first 2 games of the series. Photon couldn't keep up with Adam. Upset, his score looks good, but he didn't exactly play all that well. He was heavily outplayed by Crowny across this entire series, and you could say the same thing about Kaiser on this Braum, where, yes, some of the ultimates I think were impactful, but not nearly as impactful as they needed him to be, and the Braum was massive for the enemy team, and so really this was just them getting outclassed in basically every lane, which is not a good sign, because a lot of the reason that they are here is because they, quite frankly, are just more talented than a lot of the other teams that they're going up against. And so their mistakes and their, weaknesses, I think, are definitely exposed. And, it's going to be interesting to see who they end up facing. They're going to be playing the winner of the series that we're going to talk about next in this video. Basically today, the day that this video is going out, in order to see who's going to be moving on to finals. But before they jump into that, it's going to be a tough road. They've got a lot of things they need to fix, but most of it is just inconsistency. If they can get the good version of a lot of these players, the version that we saw in group stage, the version that we've seen in the regular season, that version can beat either of the two teams that are going to be playing in the series after this. That version could have beaten BDS and can still beat BDS if they end up meeting in the finals, but it's getting that version that's going to be the problem for Vitality. As for BDS, you've moved on now to the finals, to LEC finals. If you would have told me that BDS would be in the LEC finals in spring, I would have laughed at you, but here we are. They have absolutely deserved to get to that point. They're playing out of their mind right now, and honestly, if the other teams don't step up, we could absolutely be seeing a world where we're walking out of spring with BDS as our LEC champions. All right, but now that we've covered our first round one series here, our upper bracket, I guess finals if you want to call that, it's time to talk about who's going to be facing Vitality in that semi-final. Certainly an intriguing matchup, the two teams that came out of groups, not in first, but second in their particular groups, and kind of two teams that I don't think a lot of people expected to be in the circumstance that they ended up being in. We have the number 3 seeded G2 Esports taking on the number 8 seeded Mad Lions. At least in the regular season, that's how those two ended, but obviously both of them coming out into the top 4 here, and both of them kind of getting here in different ways. G2 coming out of a very difficult group, by far the more difficult group, having 3 of the previous top 4 teams from Winter in it. They had to beat Koi to get out of here, who they lost to in the group stage as well, and so, getting here was pretty good for them, but the defending champs, they want to kind of reclaim their glory at the top of the standings, and they have to do it against the team that they beat in Winter Finals, Mad Lions, who looked pretty bad for a majority of the split. Obviously, it was a meme in the community that Mad Lions was quote-unquote guaranteed to go to MSI. I don't know how people came to that conclusion. I think people just assumed that G2 was going to win everything, but Mad Lions is guaranteed to have the most championship points, but of course, doesn't really matter if a different team wins the finals, and so, Mad Lions still has to go out there and compete, and, this is really to prove that they are worth a lot of the championship points that they have been able to generate. They were in the finals last split, but regular season was not very good. Community sentiment has been very much against them as a team, and obviously, I've pushed back a lot on that on this channel. I think that clearly, if you're one of the two teams in the LEC to make top 4 both splits, you are obviously good at what you do. You are clearly not a bad team, but, Reddit has other ideas about what this Mad Lions team is, and so they kind of need to come out here and prove it. They are not locked into MSI by any stretch of the imagination. Both of the teams that are guaranteed top 3 and top 2 respectively, BDS and Vitality that we just talked about, both of them winning the split would mean that Mad does not make MSI, and so this narrative that Mad's locked in, it's false. It's always been false, but let's go ahead and see if Mad can prove that, the hype and the excitement that I feel around this team is justified, or if G2 is going to prove that they're just indomitable when we get to the best of 5 stage. Well, we're going to do it game by game, starting with game number 1, and the winner of game number 1 was G2 Esports. They are able to take the first game of the series, which is obviously super important here. You want to be able to generate that momentum, especially a team like G2 who really thrives off of feeling good about themselves, and they were able to do that in this game number 1. They were just the better team. 27 minutes does sell it a little bit short. I do think G2 definitely had control over this game, but it wasn't like a blowout. This wasn't an absolute demolition. It was a strong game from G2, but we'll go ahead and get into that when we kind of talk about it. The G2 lead in the early game is really what kind of propelled them in a lot of this game. They were able to get a lot of nice plays early on, and it was Yike creating a lot of them. Chasey ends up dying a ton in the beginning half of this game, just gank after gank from the Viego on the top side of the map. The Gragas, Mad Lions keeps trying to get over as a flex pick, but Niski is really the only player on this team who has played it at a super high level. I think Elyoya can play it relatively well, but the problem is that you don't want Elyoya on Gragas, you want him on something else, and, we saw that a little bit in this game, but they try to flex it top here, they try to put it into a matchup that's going to be a little bit more conducive for it, they try to counterpick mid lane here to try and capitalize on the Aurelion Soul blind in their eyes, and Chasey's just not very good at Gragas, and it became a problem. He got capitalized on in the early game, clearly G2 knew that was going to be an issue for the side of Mad Lions, and they were able to generate a pretty strong lead off of that. A couple of really nice group plays in the bot lane as well. Mickey played this game phenomenally. We will get to that further on, but a lot of creating plays from this Thresh, and Caps being able to capitalize on it as well. So G2 with a nice early game that really does get them a nice lead, but Mad do get some back in the mid game. It's not exactly like evening up the game or anything like that, but they are able to stay in it. A lot of it is coming in the mid lane. Elyoya spending a lot of time trying to take down this Aurelion Soul. Niski with that point and click ultimate being able to kind of lock down a Soul for the Lee Sin to be able to clean up. They get 2 kills. Just kind of ganking that mid lane over and over and over again, and so good stuff for Mad to at least try to find an avenue where they can take advantage, but the problem is that they don't really have control of the map, and G2 is one of those teams, and especially with this comp, with the Kennen, with the Viego, with the Jinx, with the Asol, you really don't want to wait. You don't want to let them scale. You don't want to get to these 5v5 teamfights because you're not going to be able to do a lot. And so Mad feel like they have to start forcing plays. They try to go for BB in the bot lane. I think they 3 or 4 man down in the bot lane, and G2 just sees it coming. They are able to kind of counter gank it with 4 more people. They're able to just blow up Mad Lions, and basically any good plays that Mad make from that point on in the game are just countered by G2. Having better proactivity, they destroy every 5v5 teamfight, and the game ends rather easily. Obviously it wasn't exactly the best performance from Mad. I do think that they were on a little bit of a timer, but I also hate their draft in this game. I don't like flexing the Gragas to the top lane, and the Lysandra just a little bit too passive for me. You're relying a ton on the Xayah to be able to win you team fights, and if you're not going to focus on Carzzy in the early game, I really don't understand the point of what you were doing here. But for G2, you really capitalized a lot on the mistakes that Mad made. Obviously, top lane was a bit of a problem, but Yike was just everywhere on the map. He's going to get my player of the game. He was farming up a lot early. As much as I talk about the ganks after ganks in the top lane onto Chasey, a lot of that was more circumstance and Yike kind of being in the right place at the right time. He was out farming Elyoya. Elyoya was trying to force a lot of these plays. He was trying to go out there and make things happen, and Yike was doing a good job saying, it's okay, like, of course we scale. If we get to that 5v5 stage, we're going to be fine. And so he got really strong, and then by the time they did hit the team fights, no one was really able to stop this Viego. Really good stuff from him. I think you could give player of the game to him, or I think you could give it to Mickey. I think both of them absolutely deserve it. Great Thresh game coming out from Mickey. Obviously, engages can be relatively difficult on Thresh if you're going into something like a Lysandra, who can just kind of, nullify any sort of initiation that the enemy team wants to do, but Mickey played it super well. He was not missing hooks. The boxes were always put in really advantageous situations for a lot of the dashes that Mad Lions have, and so just really good stuff. Mickey's been one of, if not the best support in Europe over the course of 2023 so far, and I think he proved it again here. Caps was good, a little bit over-aggressive in some certain points, was getting caught out a little bit more than I would like, but obviously Asol's going to do a ridiculous amount of damage. BB, picked up some really nice kills, and then Hans was good as well, but this was really Yike and Mickey's game, in my opinion. Those were the two standouts from G2. And then for Mad, on the other side, no shock. Chasey's going to get my dead of the game. This was not a good one from him on the Gragas. Doran, he is not up in the top lane, and it's just a pick that I don't think is really flexible for Mad Lions, if you will. This is a Gragas pick that has been huge for this team, but out of the mid lane. It's been Niski's best pick over the course of 2023. It was a big reason why they were able to get into finals last split, that alongside the Jace. Doesn't look like the Jace is ever going to be up, rightfully so. You should probably never let Chasey have it, but flexing Gragas into that top lane is not the answer, and I think we saw that here. I thought Carzzy actually played relatively okay, was relatively aggressive in this game, and was trying to deal damage. On the Xayah, they were able to pick up a nice 2v2 kill in the bot lane, just kind of diving the G2 bot after they shoved him under tower. That was really impressive, and Elyoya did make some nice plays alongside Niski in the mid lane, but really outside of that, there really wasn't a lot of good coming out. Elyoya missed on a lot of plays as well, and Niski was just not dealing damage towards the back half of the game. A lot to fix here for Mad, but in my opinion, a lot of it comp-oriented. I just don't think this was a good idea to go into game one with. I think you want proactivity in the early game, but you also need a fallback plan. You need something that's going to be able to scale into that late game, especially against Asol and Jinx and Viego. Because if you get outscaled, if you get outplayed in the early game like Mad did in this one, there's just really no way to recover. And so definitely want to see some more flexibility coming out from Mad in the comp, but for G2, just continue to play your style. Just continue to be aggressive in the early game, even if it's on late game champs. You're going to be able to play well because you are better as a team, or at least that's how you should be playing. And so for G2, just kind of continue this. Mad's got to win game 2. You certainly don't want to go down 2-0 against G2. We just saw what happened when a team goes down 2-0. It's not a good look. And so is Mad going to be able to pull one back, or is G2 going to take a commanding 2-0 lead in this series? Well, the winner of game number 2 was Mad Lions. They are able to take game number 2. They're able to even up the series at 1 apiece, and Obviously this game is surrounded by controversy just in general, but I'm going to try to stay away from that as I pretty much always have on this channel. I'm not really interested in talking about the pause. I'm not interested in talking about the chrono break. I'm not interested in talking about whether or not it was justified or not. I think obviously if you want my quick thoughts on it, I usually don't talk about these things. I think the chrono break was definitely justified. Clearly there was a bug in the game that, caused a game altering thing to happen. And so the chrono break was, rightfully initiated. I think the place in which they spit them back out at the chrono break is obviously debatably, good or bad, but I'm not here to talk about that. I'm just going to talk about what actually happened in the game. I know the chrono break was a big deal, but ideally, the entirety of this game doesn't get thrown out for that one play. I do think Mad did a lot in this game to be able to set themselves up for a win, even before that mistake, quote-unquote mistake, or whatever you want to call it. And so, let's go ahead and just talk about what ended up happening in the game. Mad ends up taking it with a comp that is eerily similar to what they played in game number 1, except you're staring down a G2 team that isn't going to be nearly as intimidating. You're not playing into the Viego anymore, which I think is definitely a difference. I think the Maokai adds a different layer. Obviously, Maokai much better at setting up for objectives, but not going to be nearly as scary. In that front-to-back team fight, you're going to need a lot more out of your Jinx and a lot more out of Caps on this Cassio than what you were getting in game number 1. You also have Niski on his best pick in the Gragas. You have that going mid, and you have something that can initiate team fights. You have something that can be a little bit more proactive in the top lane in the Kennen. And so, while I do think that it is very similar, and I still wouldn't have gone for a draft like this, I do like it a lot more. And they were able to execute on it well. Mad controlled the early game for the most part. I will say, some of their plays didn't work. Obviously, the dive bot lane that ends up giving Hansama a double kill. Not ideal, but some really good plays. Niski ends up getting a solo kill for first blood in the mid lane onto Caps. Just goes to show you the strength of that Gragas. People underestimate it all the time. Even Caps, who has played against it a lot, he's able to pick up that first blood. And, another really nice play, I would say, generally bot lane. Now, Yoya just kind of all over the map, kind of helping out the rest of his team. Niski doesn't really need it, but going to try and get Carzzy and Hilly ahead, I think was a really smart play, even again, if they do kind of throw it away a bit as we get further along in the game. But Mad Lions with a pretty strong early game, definitely much stronger than what they had in game number 1 to set themselves into a nice position. Now, a couple of bad plays, I would say, in the mid game for Mad. Definitely not exactly the most dominant mid game. I would say it's pretty back and forth because there are positives. But, Hans catching out Niski in the jungle, Carzzy ends up getting killed mid lane, but a lot of that is, I guess, equated out, if you will, for the mechanical outplays that Mad Lions ends up having. I mean, the Carzzy solo kill on the Hans is absolutely insane. Hans has like 4 kills at that point. He's like 4-0-0 on the Jinx, or 4-1-0 or something like that at that point on the Jinx, and Carzzy's not really all that strong on the Xayah, and he just solo kills him. Like, he just raw outplays him and solo kills him. Incredibly good stuff from Carzzy. This is the player that you needed to show up in this series. Obviously, we know Carzzy's incredibly talented. We know that Hans is incredibly talented, but, Carzzy can go head-to-head with him, and we kind of saw that in this really, really good game from him. We'll talk about him a bit more, but, again, just more plays kind of going back and forth. Again, for every good play, there's a bad play. Caps getting caught, Carzzy getting a little aggressive and getting caught, etc., etc. There were a couple of really close fights around Baron. This is where I think, obviously things start to tilt a little bit, and, obviously people are going to talk about the chrono break and everything, but I think when you talk about the grand scheme of what ended up happening and what came from those plays, Mad ends up being able to just exert a lot of pressure on the map and is able to grab Baron. They're not able to close off of that, but they are able to kind of stall out enough to get to that second Baron where they are able to just kind of dominate. They do capitalize on some G2 mistakes, the Akshan not being particularly strong in the late game, and then the Kennen really being able to decimate a lot without the exhaust up on the side of Mickey. And so, good stuff, I would say, coming out for Mad Lions. It wasn't the most dominant game. It certainly wasn't G2 in game number 1. I think that was definitely a little bit more dominant, but definitely some positives. So my player of the game is going to go to Carzzy in the bot lane, because while he was caught out a couple of times, he overextended and died in the 2v2 bot. He was caught out in the mid lane, staying just a tad bit too long. I think the positive plays that he made this game were just more impactful than any negative play that he made. I think he was overall a huge net positive for the team, and I think he played really well. I think a lot of people want to give it to Hilly on the Rakan. I think that's viable. I think you could give it to Elyoya on the Lee. He didn't really make any mistakes, but I don't think any of his flash plays were all that important. And then Niski obviously had some really good plays in the mid lane. Also had some pretty bad plays. Was a little bit more to the extreme end of what I was talking about with Carzzy. But overall, this was a team showing from Mad. It wasn't one particular player showing up and just kind of being better than the opposition. This was them as a team just playing really, really well. And, while I don't think it was the most dominant game of all time, at the very least, they were able to take it. As for G2 on the other side, though, definitely a tilting way to lose game number 2. I think, in their minds, they probably should be somewhere closer to 2-0 in this series, but that's not the case. And you got to be able to rebound. You got to be able to head to the back understand the position that you are in and be able to just kind of move forward to not let it drag you down. And G2's a good team at that, but you got to prove it to me that it's going to happen. My dud of the game is going to go to Broken Blade in the top lane onto this auction. I think very realistically, you could give this to Caps on the Cassiopeia as well. I just don't think either of them were nearly as relevant as they should have been towards the back half of the game. Caps not having a good early game, and Broken Blade not having a good late game. That's kind of just the summary here. I thought Hans was fine. Dying to Karzi was really bad, and that was kind of not game losing, but certainly kind of threw away the advantages he was able to generate. Yike was good. I think the ultimates were solid, and, you know, there's really not a lot you can mess up on Maokai. And then I thought Mickey was fine on the Tom. Not nearly as good as what we saw from Labrav earlier in the week, but still, like, good nonetheless. I just think G2 was a little bit off from being able to take this game. If they can just kind of rebound, not let themselves get tilted from how the events of Game 2 played out, I think they're going to be fine. But it is 1-1 in this series now, and as we move on to Game 3, it's definitely going to matter to see who can take control of this series. You don't want to be the team that has to win 2 in a row to close this out. So who's going to take game number 3? Well, the winner of game number 3 was Mad Lions. They are able to take game number 3. They're able to go up in the series 2-1 and really take control of what we are doing here in this round number 1. Remember, you can't lose this series. The team that does lose this series is eliminated from the playoffs, and so this is kind of a must-win for both teams, and for Mad to be able to come out and be up 2-1 here when a lot of people wrote them off, a lot of people said they didn't have any chance against G2. Clearly, they are proving that they, at the very least, deserve to be in top 4, and that they have had a really, you know, kind of a crazy run into where they are right now. But another really good game from them, a good bounce back, I would say, from early on in game number 1. Game 2, you know, a lot of people can talk about the shenanigans, talk about whether or not they deserved it, but game 3 was really all them, and honestly, it was a good win. Let's go ahead and talk about it. G2, ironically enough, actually sets the pace early on for the most part here. It's a really good, or really close, I would say, first blood for Elyoya in a big skirmish in the mid lane, jungle, you know, somewhere around that area, and then you just get this really big roam from Broken Blade. He's able to come in and pick up 2 kills, a double kill in it, so even though you are getting first blood on the side of Mad Lions, because Elyoya plays it really well, you're getting gold on the Darius, which is not a particularly good trade, certainly not something that you want to be taking all that regularly in this circumstance, but G2 doesn't capitalize super on it early in the game. They do fight mid again for another 3 or so kills. I believe it's another 3 for 0. We're honestly looking at like a 3 or 4k gold lead for G2 by like 10 minutes into the game, which is really strong. Like at that point, you would say, especially with the comp that G2 has, that they're in a really good spot. This is a really greedy comp. They need to be able to generate those leads, but they did generate those leads. You know, the Bel'Veth wasn't super far ahead, but you've got a Zeri, you've got a strong Darius. You've got a lot of tools to be able to fight in the late game. Unfortunately, they just couldn't survive up until that point. Some really good plays from Mad in the mid game and just capitalizing, I would say. The best way I can put it is just capitalizing on what G2 isn't doing right. You know, they go for a play on Niski, but they get caught and they end up dying in that. We got some duo plays for Mad Lions in the top and the bot lane. Really nice gank from Elyoya top side. And then a really nice play countering a gank bot side to be able to basically win everywhere on the map. And all of a sudden, that gold lead that G2 was able to generate pretty early on in this game has just completely disintegrated. And Mad is basically back within striking distance. It's basically even gold. Now, Darius is still really strong here. It's not going to be the easiest mid game of all time, but a really big Herald steal coming out from Elyoya that really does change kind of the trajectory of how this mid game is going, and basically from that point onwards, Mad just wants to fight, and they're winning a lot of fights. Niski does a great job being able to engage on this Gragas, pair that up with the Sejuani, and even like flash blitzcrank hooks that I think have been really good from Hylissang. You're just setting up targets so that Karzi can mow them down, and that's kind of the game plan for Mad from this point onwards. You're looking at G2's side and you're saying they're really squishy, especially if that Darius is going to get picked off early, or if he's not going to be in the fight at all, which is certainly something we will talk about in a bit. But if you can get that blitzcrank hook, it's basically a free fight win, right? You're going to be able to generate a pretty big lead, and Mad did a really good job with that big Herald fight. A lot of really nice picks in the mid game. They were able to pick off Yike multiple times. They were able to pick off Caps. Just multiple really good plays coming out for Mad Lions to slowly grow this gold lead up until eventually they just get Baron because they have much better positioning, they're in a much better spot in the game, and they're basically able to take it for free, and then the game just kind of snowballs out of control. It's just a consistent theme with what the first 3 games of the series have been, which is quite frankly Mad's macro dominance, which is not really what I expected going into the series, but I do think Elyoya has done a much better job controlling the map and being able to transition the mid-game into the late game. That's something that I honestly think G2's been pretty bad at over the course of the series. Yike in particular was not good at it in this game. Like I said, Mad doing a good job controlling objectives. A little bit of resistance in the late game. Caps does get a really nice Tibbers ult off that is able to kind of dissuade the first push from Mad, but they're able to regroup, they're able to get Soul, and they're able to just end a minute later. So good stuff overall for Mad. You're on series point now, and I know a lot of people didn't see them being in this spot, but they've deserved to be in this spot up until this point. My player of the game is going to go to Carzzy again. I know maybe I'm a little bit high on him in terms of what he's been able to output, but I actually think he's been really important over the last 2 games. He kind of showed his mechanical brilliance in the previous game, just kind of outplaying Hansama, quite frankly. And in this one, the entire team comp was set up around making sure that this Jinx was in a good position to be able to fight the rest of the game. And he capitalized on it. Some really good hooks from Hylissang, good engages coming out from Elyoya and Niski, and Carzzy did a really good job making sure that he followed up on it. None of that would matter if the Jinx wasn't dealing damage, but Carzzy was a really big threat in this game and was a big reason why G2 had a lot of trouble fighting back. A lot of their gold on their side, G2's side, was on Broken Blade, but unfortunately, he's not Adam, and I mean that in the nicest way possible, in the sense of watching Adam play Darius and watching Broken Blade play Darius it's just so interesting, right? BB was super far up, more far up, even farther up, I guess you could say, than what Adam usually is when he plays Darius, but the problem is, he wasn't grouping, he wasn't using that power to be able to influence the rest of the map. He was just kind of staying off in a side lane, and Chasey was doing a good enough job clearing wave, or, you know, sometimes it was Niski, or they just had threats that could kind of subdue what Broken Blade wanted to do in terms of pressure, and they could win any 4v4. Because all the gold, again, was on this Darius, and so if he wasn't going to be in these fights, you've got the Jinx, you've got the initiation, you've got plenty of ways to win these fights, and it just didn't feel like G2 had a very good handle on what they wanted to do with the gold and the Darius in this game, and I think Carzzy definitely took advantage of that. Hylissang had a great game. Elyoya and Niski are really good. Niski's got, like, I want to say, like, 100% win rate on this Gragas. I mean, the team does not lose when he gets this pick. It has to be on the top of their minds. This can't be a flex pick anymore. This has to be Niski's pick, and it has to be something that they prioritize really highly. I think I looked it up. I think they legitimately have like a 90% win rate or something close to that when he is on Gragas in 2023, and they play it a lot. It's his most played champion by a considerable margin, and so something obviously that I would expect them to continue to go to. Obviously, getting Jace for Chasey is always going to be a positive as well, but just in general, it felt like Matt had the advantage in this game, the comfort advantage, and they really had the macro advantage in terms of what they wanted to do, and it mattered a lot. As for G2 on the other side, it's worry mode. Like, you are 1 game away from being eliminated. Yes, you have already qualified for MSI. Yes, technically, the Spring Split doesn't matter at all to you, but you still don't want to go out in 4th place if you're a team that's going to be going to MSI. You want to at least be competitive. You want to at least try to be champions, or at least be close to that. And in this series, right now, they're kind of getting outplayed, and that's something that we know G2 can come back from. They're certainly not out of this. Winning 2 games in a row is not out of the question for a team like G2, but they got to get their shit together. They did pick a lot of comfort in this game, most notably the Bel'Veth and the Darius. Those are 2 picks that obviously these players like a lot, but it's not going to work out if you don't play for it as a group. Yike had his worst game as a Bel'Veth in Pro, and I don't even think it's really all that close, or at least, you know, in the LEC, right? He's going to get done to the game. No pressure on this Bel'Veth. He wasn't able to generate that early lead, and, you know, we've seen him be able to dominate on this pick in the past, but when he's not able to get that early lead, it's quite frankly just not a very useful pick, and that's kind of what we saw in this game. And then, like I said, Broken Blade needed to influence the map more. He was the one with all the gold, and instead he just kind of sat in a side lane and did nothing. I know a lot of people are going to kind of defend him, because I do think he played relatively well, and he won lane, and he did a lot of good things, but at the end of the day, you got to use your pressure to be able to translate that into more, and I just don't think he did that in this one. Caps has continued to not be all that good in this series, continuously getting caught out basically for no reason. You know, flanks that are way too dangerous, not scouting for vision, things that he's typically better at. And then Hans and Mickey really have not been a factor. I think Carzzy's, quite frankly, just been better than Hans over the course of this series so far. And so definitely some things that need to turn around for G2, but it's impossible to count this team out. There's a reason that they won Winter Split. There's a reason they beat the team that they're staring across from in Winter Split. It's because, quite frankly, they should be better than them. They've just got to get back onto the right track, and Game 4 is going to be a big one for that. But are they going to be able to do it, or is Mad actually going to be able to close this out in 4 games? Well, the winner of game number 4 was G2 Esports. They are able to take game number 4. They're able to push us to a game number 5, and they are able to keep themselves alive here in the playoffs. A must-win game that they did go out and win. Obviously, the journey is not done yet. You've got to be able to complete the story here for G2, but this is exactly how you needed to start. You needed to be able to win this game 4, and you went out and you did it. And let me say, like, this is going to be probably the shortest recap of all the games because this was an absolute massacre. This was the, most dominant game of the series by far, and most dominant game of the weekend, or at least so far, by far. It just was not close at any point in the game. Really, there was only one play that went right for Mad Lions, and it was the first play of the game, and then after that, it was just decline after decline after decline. It was just bad play after bad play after bad play. We can talk about some mistakes that G2 made as well, but, those were G2 mistakes. Those weren't Mad Lions plays that were going right. This was a dominating game from G2, and that's kind of what we wanted to see in this circumstance. So, what ended up happening? Well, the one play that Mad Lions did actually get right was Yike overextending at level 1. He ends up trying to invade. Him and Broken Blade walk up, but Chasey and Elyoya, I guess I should say, are ready for it. They are sitting in the bush. They know that the Maokai has the potential to invade, and so they kind of wait for it, and they're able to chase him into his own jungle, and they're able to pick up first blood, basically for free. A nice follow-up from Niski to make sure that there's nothing that Broken Blade can do about it, and it's basically just a free kill at the beginning of level 1 for Mad Lions. This should secure them control of the early game. Really, there is no excuse at this point. You're playing Wukong into something like Maokai. You should already have a lot of advantage in that matchup, and especially with a kill onto your top laner going into this Kennen, you should have a lot of pressure from that level 1 onwards. Unfortunately, that's just not exactly how things went. Things started to deteriorate pretty quickly for Mad, and I think a lot of it started in the bot lane trade. We can kind of skip ahead to when everybody starts moving top lane, everybody except for Hansama and Karzi, who end up dueling it out in the bottom lane, and Hansama just absolutely obliterates him. Like, I don't know what Karzi was thinking trying to 1v1 the Lucian as a Jinx at, 8 minutes into the game, but he certainly did go ahead and give it a try. It did not work out, though. Hansama picks up a massive kill there. That is going to be a little bit of a problem for the rest of the game because, spoiler alert, there really isn't a clean answer to Lucian on this team, and so he ends up getting really strong. He ends up being up 40, 50 CS by the time we hit the midpoint of the game, and then even outside of that, it's just more, diving bot. It's more Hansama and Mickey just kind of showing off the power of this Lucian Nami lane. I know European fans in particular have been pretty anti the Lucian Nami lane over the course of 2023 because it hasn't exactly been as strong as it was in past years, and obviously I just think in general scaling AD carries have been incredibly good. Jinx in particular has been really strong for Mad throughout the playoffs, and just in general in this series it's been really, really good, and so to see the Lucian Nami come out and be successful I think was a really big positive. Obviously Yike doing a good job to be able to enable that. Hans doing a great job to be able to get himself the lead, and then Yike just kind of turning it into a massive problem for, Mad Lions to actually have to solve, and quite frankly, they can't. And that kind of takes us into the mid game. The mid game is really slow, which I think benefits G2 here. Not that they scale, infinitely better, right? But you've got a Kennen, you've got a Maokai, you've got tools to be able to deal with the mid to late game. I'll talk about Caps in a bit because you're seeing that Nocturne in the mid lane, and I know I haven't mentioned it yet, but you're seeing that Nocturne in the mid lane, and the pick didn't really work. There really wasn't a lot of good plays coming out from Caps in this one, but Lucian Nami from ahead is going to be a problem, even though, theoretically they're going to get outscaled by Jinx. When they're this far ahead, you're going to be able to delay that quite a bit, and they were able to do that in this game. Eventually, G2 just starts slowly suffocating. We're just seeing, Chasey getting caught out a little bit, or Hilly being way too aggressive on the rel and just going in and dying for no reason, and these small mistakes where Mad feels like they have to do something to try and get back into the game that G2 know they can capitalize on. They can get objectives off of it. They can basically get Soul for free. They can basically get Baron for free. And then they know they're not going to be able to lose any team fights from that point onwards. They're just way far up in stats, and so that's really the only way I can summarize the game. There's not a lot of individual plays that I want to point to and be like, these were good plays for G2, because it really was just mostly a suffocation, I guess is the word I'll use, a strangulation coming out from G2, just, ending the game as quickly as they can, and they did a really good job of it. Hansama is clearly the player of the game for me. This Lucian was a massive issue for Mad Lions. They really didn't have an answer to it. And really the only answer to it would be getting Jinx online, but you just weren't going to be able to do that. Karzi was really bad in this game. We'll get to that in a bit, but Hans and Mickey were phenomenal, really showing off the power of that Lucian Nami. Yike was really good as well outside of that level 1, and I think Broken Blade definitely did his job well. The only player on G2 I was a little bit concerned about was Caps in the mid lane. This Nocturne pick, while, obviously he won the game, and it's clearly an interesting pick, I don't think it really worked all that well. A couple of plays where he was just out of position, not necessarily communicating with the rest of the team, it seemed like, because he just wasn't on the same page with a lot of the plays that they wanted to make. I'm not really sure what that is, but it's certainly not something that we saw a lot in winter, and so to see it here in the best of fives in spring, it's certainly concerning, but at the very least, they were able to win the game. Hans and Mickey were just so far ahead. And Yike was so dominant across this game. Like, yes, the level 1 happened, but Yike was a problem for Mad to deal with as well. There was just really not a lot of ways for them to get back into this. As for Mad, on the other side, you're going to be disappointed with how this game ended up going because, you know, you had the series kind of in the palm of your hands, and you basically just gave G2 all the momentum right back by giving them this game number 4, but pretty miserable showing from the bot lane. Like, that's really kind of got to be the takeaway here. They've been really good up until this point in this series, but this was miserable. I mean, you want to give dud of the game to Carzzy? Great. You want to give it to Hylissang? Great. I gave it to Hylissang because it felt like he had more, like, what the hell are you doing kind of plays, like just dying, you know, solo in a random side lane kind of plays, or going in way before the enemy team is, you know, even remotely out of stuff and just kind of getting blown up instantly. There were just a lot of plays that the rel engages just did not work. Really bad decision making from Hilly in this game. But Carzzy's positioning was also garbage. Like, there really isn't a lot of positives to talk about this Jinx with, and so I really do think you could go either way. Niski wasn't very good on the Ahri. Elyoya had no pressure on the Wukong even after he was gifted an assist at level 1. And Chasey really couldn't do anything in the top lane. I'm not going to blame him entirely. I know a lot of people meme on Chasey with the Gragas, but this game was far from his fault, even if I do think that the Gragas absolutely should have gone mid lane. But that's gonna bring us to game number 5. Like, that is your recap up until this point. It is win or go home in a best of 1 for these two teams. Obviously, both of them kind of relying on themselves to win out in order to get them into MSI. Mad Lions, if they win this series, they have to win the title. G2, if they win this series, they have to win the title to get Mad Lions in, but, you know, G2's already confirmed for MSI, so definitely more stakes for Mad, but an interesting series nonetheless. So who's going to be able to take that game 5? Who's going to be able to take the big Silver Scrapes game? Well, the winner of game number 5 was Mad Lions. They are able to take game number 5. They're able to win the series, and they're able to push themselves into top 3, and funny fact, they are the only team in the LEC, the only European team to get top 3 in both splits. They are the most consistent team in Europe in the year 2023, and that's a fact. And where are the haters at now? I don't think a lot of people saw them coming out in this series. I don't think a lot of people saw BDS beating Vitality. I don't think a lot of people saw Mad Lions beating G2. This was a little bit of an upset round number 1, and I'm definitely here for it. A very fun, relatively back and forth game number 5 here, but Mad definitely proving themselves to be the better team. This wasn't just, you know, them getting lucky, you know, G2 making mistakes. It was a little bit of that. Obviously, you know, the losing team is going to have some plays that they didn't necessarily play perfect, but Mad did a really good job pushing their advantages and staying in the game when honestly G2 was doing a good job trying to choke them out. So let's go ahead and talk about it. We have to start with the level 1. Crazy 5v5 in the bot lane at level 1. The casting for this went absolutely nuts. If you haven't seen the clip, go find it. It's really funny, but it's actually in favor of G2. Cassio gets the first blood. The only kill that Cassio would get the entire game, and it feels like G2 just kind of comes out on top. Matt has to burn a lot of sums to be able to run away from this, and it's honestly not a great play for them overall, and so good stuff from G2, but they basically immediately give it over. Once the game actually starts for real, Mad generate a lot of really nice plays. Elyoya with a good gank in the top lane to be able to kill Broken Blade, and then Mad also catch Yike out in the jungle. He's being just a little bit too aggro onto the Jarvan, trying to set up for that early Drake, and Mad just does a good job knowing that he's going to be able to do that and catching him out in the jungle, being able to get, you know, a pretty small lead here, and it's good. You know, a really good job for Mad to be able to kind of secure their spot in the early game. It's not really like a lead per se, it's like 500 gold, but at the end of the day, you know, you'll kind of take whatever you can get. Now, really where things start to go in favor of one team or the other is actually in favor of G2 at the first Herald fight. We can talk about first drag, which is G2 getting it, but they have to blow every sum to get out. It's important, but it really doesn't matter all that much in the grand scheme of the game. The first Herald is really where things start to break open. Massive ultimate from Hansama that basically comes from base and just absolutely obliterates Mad Lions, and they're really not able to recover from that. G2's able to pick up the Herald, they're able to win the fight, they're able to use the Herald, and all of a sudden it's a 2k gold lead, and it's like, uh-oh, G2's just gonna strangle them out. It's what they've done in all the wins this series. They've been able to generate that early lead. They really haven't relinquished it at any point, but I want to give a really big shout out, I would say, to Mad Lions, because while G2 was trying to make some plays, like they were trading, we had some trades in the mid lane, and then we had, 1v1 in the top lane. Like there were a couple plays that kind of went back and forth that ended up just being kind of neutral trades, but G2 was getting the better of them because look at their comp. Obviously, if you trade kills with, Cassio and Jinx, like it's going to be a little bit of a problem, but really good job from Mad to stay looking for these plays. It's something that you're never going to say that Hylissang is not doing, and they find one in the mid lane. They're able to get a 2 for 0 that basically brings the gold right back even, which is absolutely massive, and then we move on to third Drake, and this is where things start to really move in favor of Mad. They're able to steal that dragon. They basically pressure G2 out of the pit, and it becomes a 50-50 smite that Elyoya just wins. Maybe the experience factor coming in there. They pick up a kill, and that regains their lead. They're basically playing from a 1k advantage at this point. Not anything devastating, but still something really good. And then it's just the Mad that we've seen throughout the whole series. It's pick after pick after pick. They continue to find it. They chunk out Broken Blade right before Baron, so they basically get that entirely for free. But G2 doesn't entirely disconnect. Like, they don't run away. They don't just give it over for free. Yike flashes in to try and steal it. He's a little bit late on that. Broken Blade TP's in. They want to try and fight this, because obviously they feel like if they just give this away for free, they lose the game. Well, they fought this and they lost the fight, and then guess what? They lost the game right then and there. I thought this was going to go a lot longer, but this ended up only being a 27-minute game, and a pretty strong win for Mad for them to move on to the semi-finals. Really, really good stuff from them, but I think you could give props to a lot of the players on the side of Mad. I'm going to give my player of the game to Carzzy. I know he wasn't perfect the entire series. Game 4 definitely stands out as not a particularly good performance from him, but their wins, he was arguably the best player in all of them. And I think that's super important for Mad. We can talk about how Elyoya and Niski have been pretty consistently good in best of fives. Niski obviously not great in that game 4, but nobody was really great in that game 4. But Elyoya was really good in the best of fives in winter. Niski was phenomenal in the best of fives in winter as well. So was Chasey, but we'll get to him in a bit. They're kind of the stable forces in my mind. We kind of know that Elyoya and Niski are going to be at least relatively good. It's Carzzy and Hilly that are going to be the big deciding factor as to whether or not this team can be legit, and they were legit in this series. Carzzy in particular, I think his positioning outside of Game 4 was really good. His aggressiveness was really good, and he was definitely willing to deal damage. That chunking out of Broken Blade that kind of caused that Baron to get taken for free, that was all Ezreal. It was basically just a 1v1 where Ezreal just obliterated him, and so really, really good stuff coming out from Carzzy, but Hilly also played this series well. Love to see the Pike coming out. Elyoya and Niski were great. Elyoya in particular was really good in this series. I don't know why people still doubt him as a player. Like, I get it. He's not the flashiest name in the regular season, but the dude has been so consistently good for so long now in best of fives that how do you not believe in him when you get to this stage of the season? He's my number 1 jungler in the region, and he's going to continue to stay there so long as he has performances like this in games that really matter in them. Chasey, Niski, really, really good. That Gragas win rate's only going to keep going up, and it's another really good game from him. Mad Lions is just so fun to watch, and quite frankly, I'm really happy that they proved a lot of the haters wrong. We've seen so many tweets and so many Reddit threads about how this team's gonna go to MSI. They're guaranteed to go to MSI, which isn't true. And they don't deserve it, which isn't true. And I'm just so happy to see this team say, screw that. Screw the noise. Screw the narrative that has been created around us. Obviously, it's not true. We're going to go ahead and prove that we really are a good team, that we're maybe the most consistent team in the LEC, one that I think the region would be proud to send. And now we're going to do it on our own. We're not going to rely on G2 winning the split to be able to get there, which I guess a lot of people just thought was a foregone conclusion, because that was the way that MSI got, or that Mad Lions got to MSI. Really don't understand where this narrative was created, but Mad clearly disproving it here. As for G2, rough way to go out, man. I mean, this is the last game that you're going to play until MSI play-ins, which it's not exactly the biggest confidence booster. You had moments in this game where you looked all right, but a couple of players really kind of letting you down this series. Caps is definitely chief among them. He's going to get done of the game here again. And quite frankly, he was bad this series. This is one of the worst best of fives I've ever seen Caps play. He had no pressure the entire series. Niski was just the better mid laner, and I think a lot of people are saying that that's not on Niski, but I do think Niski played really well this series. I think, honestly, underratedly good. But Caps was kind of bad, just not necessarily a good performance coming out from him. I think Broken Blade was also someone that was very questionable outside of their wins, especially in this game 5. He was not very good. Those solo laners were a massive issue for G2, but Yike kind of getting exposed a little bit for his lack of macro in the mid game. Hans and Mickey were fine. I certainly don't think they were the problem, but they weren't the solution either. I think Hans looked really good on the Lucian Nami, but that was mostly Mad not being ready for the early game aggression and just kind of taking trades that they absolutely shouldn't have to give that Lucian a huge lead. And in general, I think a lot of what G2 did right in this series was Mad kind of messing up. And so I'm a little bit worried about G2. I'm not going to say I'm going to hit full panic mode or anything like that. I've talked about this a bit, but, you know, winning Winter kind of sets you up really well for the rest of the split, or the rest of the year, I guess you can say, because you don't really have to care all that much about any other split. Because if you win Winter, you're automatically going to MSI at the very least as play-ins, and you get as much as you would get from winning Summer because you're already in the season finale that qualifies you for Worlds. And so they kind of have a little bit more leeway to kind of take Spring and Summer to experiment with a few things. It's just, hopefully you can see a little bit more progress as we get into Summer. But, you know, for G2, not the best series overall, and definitely some things to work on, I would say. But for Mad, congratulations to them. They're moving on to the semifinals to face Vitality now, and quite frankly, that's a team that is very beatable at the moment, and Mad could shock the world again and continue on to the finals if things go right. Alright, but that is going to do it for my LEC Spring Split Playoffs Round 1 overview and analysis. I do hope you guys enjoyed. I'm trying to get this out relatively on time. The schedule's been pretty jam-packed, so this is coming out actually as the BDS Vitality games are being played. I really do appreciate you guys kind of, you know, giving me some leeway on this. Getting that new computer up and running, making sure I have all the programs ready has been a little bit more of a challenge than I expected, but I do appreciate you guys' patience. If you guys enjoyed, let me know down in the comment section below, and of course, leave a like, because it really does mean a lot to me to let me know that you guys are enjoying the content, and also to help get this out to more people. Of course, if you're new here, hit that subscribe button. I cover the LEC, I obviously cover every other major region as well, and with MSI coming up, we're going to have some awesome major coverage. We'll be finishing out the LEC playoffs and then getting into MSI as soon as we know all the teams that are qualified for that, so hit that sub button if you don't want to miss any of that content. But of course, with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day, and I will see you all later.